Happy Thursday, everyone. It's Rhiannon here with the BCHA again, and it's pretty exciting. We're in our fourth Tell It To Me Thursday, and this week we're talking about. Hi, everyone. If you see a double hello, it's probably because this thing is still getting a little. We're still working this out. Rhiannon here with the Berrien County Historical Association. We're really glad that you joined us again this week, and not so professional today. I'm rocking out my Girls on the Run 2016 5K shirt. When I'm not working for you guys, I am a board member for Girls on the Run in Northwest Indiana. And I wear these shirts because right now I am working on our green room next door in the courthouse. And we were supposed to paint that and get it kind of pulled together back in November when we did the initial renovation of the exhibits and the large renovation over at the courthouse, but we never got to it. We just didn't have time. So it's been on my honey-do list for several months now. That's twice as long as it's been on there. And so this week I've been slowly painting it. The goal for the green room is to be a place where we can have meetings. So if people need to have like a small meeting, they can come to us. But more importantly, it's a place where our performers, for like our musical programs or our guest speakers, or our brides, as we start pulling more weddings into the courthouse, that they are able to have a place to get ready. So I've been working on it all week. I know everyone's like, oh, it takes like a day to paint. And I literally am on day 4 of painting this stupid room, and I'm definitely done. I have to actually paint the walls today. The rest of the walls, we did a feature wall yesterday, and then the rest of the walls are getting painted today. After this is done. And then I will have to start pulling it together. There are certain things we don't have yet, like we need to put curtains in there and a curtain rod, and I gotta get some stuff pulled over there. So it's gonna be a long time. It's gonna be a bit before it gets to where I want it, but at least we'll be ready for it. And the junk's out of there, which is even nicer. It's been a junk room for so long. So this week's Tell It To Me Thursday is about exhibits. And every week, like I said, we've been trying to do some things that can help you guys take all of our lessons and apply at home. So I'm kind of hoping some of the things we talk about today will help you create a gallery wall in your home featuring your favorite art, your favorite images, your favorite photos. But for the most part, exhibits provide us an opportunity to tell stories. And there are around 3 types of exhibits. You have a permanent exhibit. So these are meant to last for a fair number of years. They will go on for a long time. In some smaller institutions, they're there for decades. The rule of thumb is about every 10 years, you should be looking at your exhibits and saying, especially if you're a small institution like ours, and making sure that the information is still accurate. Are there things that can be changed out? Do you have artifacts that can be changed out with newer items that have been donated? Or in general, can we relax these collection and archival pieces so they're not exposed to different temperatures, to light, to people? We tell you guys not to touch things because it helps preserve our artifacts, but there's something about telling people not to do something that seems to drive them to do it. So that's why everything's usually behind glass or plexiglass. There are semi-permanent exhibits, so these guys are meant to go for a fair number of years, between 2 and 5. They'll be around for a while. They are not going to necessarily be changed out. And then you have your temporary exhibits. And temporary exhibits are changed out relatively frequently. Some people will rotate their exhibits out once a year. Some will rotate them out every 6 months. My experience with exhibits have been every other month. When I was in Brownsville, I did 60 exhibits in 4 years. We had multiple buildings in that capacity too. So there was at one point, I had 5 exhibits going across 5 buildings. So here we didn't have a whole lot of major turnover in the last few years in our exhibits, with them lasting for months and months and months. And so our goal this year was to sit there and say, no, we want more stories to be told. When we did the strategic plan, that's what you guys told us. You want more stories, you want to see more things. The other thing about exhibits is they're also meant for us to connect our collections and archives to you guys. Now, not everything can come out, and there's always creative ways in which we can do it. Obviously, when people think about exhibits, they think of the big, fancy exhibits that they see at like the Field Museum or at the Shed. where they have a lot more money to work with than we do. But we can still do exhibits on a smaller scale. I've been making investments in our exhibit repertoire, so to speak. So as you can see behind me, I like to point out when I'm doing this with you guys, I'm seeing everything the opposite, so that's why it's a little difficult. So behind me are a series of frames, with the exception of the big one in the middle, all the frames we purchased from Michael's. And what we end up doing is we have 8x10 that can be matted down to 5x7. We have 5x7 that can be matted down to 4x6. I have a couple of plain 4x6 ones I bought at IKEA when I went to IKEA a few months ago, which was the worst thing I should have ever done for this job, was to go to IKEA. Dangerous place. So I'm down here in our sheriff's office. So we're in a little bit different location today. And this is where, as you can see behind me, we've got some things going on. And this is a walk in the park. So you guys are getting a first look at the walk in the park exhibit. This exhibit was supposed to run from April until May. And unfortunately, obviously, because we were closed due to COVID-19, we're shifting this from May to June. And that's right, everything's going. No one may be able to see this. One of the things my colleagues in the field have been working on has been developing virtual exhibits so that you can see our artifacts in 3D. You can explore the pictures. Unfortunately, none of our computers are in the capacity. Our computers are very old and very worn. And unfortunately, like for example, these videos are being done on my personal laptop, which is only like a year and a half old, because I don't even have access to a camera or a microphone on my work computer. So, plus this one's a lot lighter to haul around. So we decided to do, originally there was supposed to be 7 exhibits, then it jumped up to 8, and then it jumped back down to 7. Likely what's going to end up happening is we have canceled our September community curated, which was all about school and school memories. And instead we're shifting everything out so that we can still have 19 suffrage history in Southwest Michigan run the 2.5 months I originally wanted. We're looking at To the Polls in October and November, which is about elections and people being elected here in Berrien County. And then we'll do another Christmas themed one in December. Hopefully another community curated one, but we seem to do pretty well. So let's talk about exhibits. So there's different types of exhibits in terms of like their length of time, but there's also different types of exhibits that you can have. So how you would hang an art exhibit is much different than how you would do a history exhibit. And in fact, Tara and I were talking about that earlier as we were going through the resumes for the new curator, to hire our new curator. I would like to say, you probably can't hear it, but the ground's really squeaky where I'm at, so if you hear something in the background, that's me. So one of the things that our biggest goal is to tell a story. Sometimes a story can be told through just photos, it can be told just through interpretive text, it can be told through vignettes and action scenes, it could be a combination of them. And the cool thing is I got a combination of them here. Our goal is to present a thesis to our visitors and saying, here is a section of history that we are talking about, or here is a type of art we want to share with you. And this is the story that we're trying to tell. So ultimately, we're trying to tell you a story. And in our permanent exhibits, they should be telling the story of whatever. So in this case, the history of Berrien County, or legal history, or early industries. So we lack good quality permanent exhibits here that give context to the buildings that we're in. Our long-term goal is to change that. I've actually been doing grant writing here in the last couple of weeks as well to do that. So in our temporary exhibits, we use a combination of the vignettes, a combination of artifacts, a combination of photos, trying to basically put together everything that we need. In this capacity, we actually asked people to join us. Now, when we originally started, we had 4 confirmed partners, Warren Dunes State Park, the Berrien County Park System, and Chickaming Open Lands and Fernwood Botanical Gardens. Fernwood and Chickaming never got back to me before I could install the exhibit, and that's mostly because they're closed, and this is not on the list of their priorities. But Warren Dunes and the park system, both we had been working with a couple months on, so we got everything right around the time we originally closed in the middle of March. So what I had chosen so one of the things we do when we're planning exhibits is we look to see how, well, number one is our space. So we have 2 rooms here on the lower level of the sheriff's residence that we use. So we have to take into consideration our available wall space, like our windows and our physical floor, making sure that it's easy for people to walk through and pace through. We have to take into consideration that we have this rail system. So this is a hanging system that we use long nylon cables with hooks, flat hooks that we can do either regular frames or I don't have it here. We'll take a walk around our foam core panels. And so that system also limits us because there's only so much weight that these guys can carry. What we do for the heavier things, like the guy behind me, he's a wooden frame and he's got some heft to him. I double up. So if you were to walk in here, you'd see 2 cables hanging this guy, and we've got several of the hooks to keep it going. So we take into consideration the space. The second thing we take into consideration is availability of objects and artifacts, along with what we have in our archives to supplement everything. So can we tell that story? Now, sometimes the type of it, the theme of the exhibit, whatever we're going to talk about, may be driven by what's in the collection. So, for example, next year I am tentatively planning a baseball exhibit, and I am tentatively planning an exhibit on the Blossom Time Festival pageant, because Miss Ree used to do pageants, and I've always wanted to do a pageant-themed exhibit. So we got the Blossom Time Festival Queens, and I'd love to talk about that history. So those are 2 that we are wanting to talk about. I have items in my collection about the Festival Queens. I have stuff about Blossom Time Festival. I also have stuff about baseball. But the question always is it enough? In this case, I had to ask partners to join us, and it's good. Our goal should be lifting up the voice of our partners in history, so to speak. And so when we come to 19 and we come to the polls, we'll probably reach out to other museums, and in the case of the election one, probably to politicians, and ask them to help donate to things. Because that certainly provides us with an opportunity to share people's own personal collections as well. So when it comes to designing the exhibits, there's a couple different ways to do it. There are people who will plot out every single detail and know exactly where every single bit's going to go. Others will do a soft layout, and that's kind of what I do. But once you get everything into the room, you might have to make some changes. Maybe things being bigger than you thought, things smaller than you thought. And then there's some who are just chaotic, and they come in here and they're like, well, we got stuff, we'll put it in here. I'm in that middle category. I like to hear what the room is telling me. And sometimes I don't have a full vision of it because I may not have everything I need. I may have some things, and then in that capacity, I go, okay, now I need this. So I did for Dear Santa in December, and what we did with Wish You Were Here is we started out seeing what we had, and then we started adding to it. Sometimes we overpull things, and then we just subtract it. When we were filling in for a cup of sugar, I said, find anything related to food, and we'll put in what we can and take out what we don't need. And that's exactly what happened. And so it ended up being really cool because my curator at the time, Sandra, didn't realize it, but she brought me enough items to make a vignette in one of my cases to make breakfast. So it worked out really well. And then when we found these cookbooks, I was able to pull a couple of the cookbooks to show breakfast, coffee, and pancake, waffles. That's what it was. So in exhibits, we have a couple different ways of displaying things. We can have standalone areas where there's no coverage, so our vignettes. We have things that are framed out, things that are on foam core that may not be framed out. And then we have something called vitrines, and these are usually wooden pedestal bases, and then they have a plexiglass top on it. Now, the reason we use plexiglass rather than glass is for safety reasons. But here we do have a couple of thinner cases that we use for more flatter items that are made of glass. But they are based on the way they're sitting on the bases, we're able to make sure they don't get knocked off. So when you're wanting to hang things in your home, take into consideration a couple of things. Number one, eye level. 53 inches off the ground is usually where average eye level is at. So you want everything, if you're doing it in your home, measure 53 inches from the floor, and that will be where you're going to hang things. I don't do 53 inches, but that's usually what most people do. And then you want the center of your frame, of your canvas, whatever it is you're hanging, to be at that eye level. If you're gonna layer things, like say on a hanging, like on a floating shelf, go a little bit lower on the shelf so that you have more visual of the artwork. You want it to go too high. Now, obviously, we have very big ceilings here. You can actually purchase tracks like this from different vendors. American Hanging Systems, I think, is where we purchase ours from. And the tracks alone cost about $23 for a 6-foot length. And then the cables that we use, the nylon cables, I think were like $3 each. But your real cost is the number of hooks that you need. Those guys are like $1, $2 each, and you tend to need a lot of those. So you can purchase that if you have high ceilings and you want to hang things but don't want to put too many nails in your wall or be able to change things out, like you just need to have things rotated out. Get a hanging system. That'll probably be your best bet. Make sure when you're hanging your hanging system that you're embedding it into a safe wall and as many of those screws into the studs as possible. That way you're hanging it. Now, we went with nylon because they're clear and they're not obtrusive and you can't tell that they're there. But you can get them in metal, like a cable, a metal cable that will be a little bit more sturdier and can carry more weight. Always make sure you're checking out the weight of your cables before you purchase them, because if they're not the right weight, things will slide off, and that's the end of it. Your stuff will break. For cases, you want to make sure that if you're going to buy a case, you can buy a plexiglass top. They're not cheap. That's why I'm really hurting for some, but I don't have any. I need more, and I got one that's damaged that we need to have repaired. Unfortunately, we will not be able to get that anytime soon. Our numbers are not where they need to be financially for that. But what we do is we make sure that they are the size that they need, and they're usually a little bit less, and I'll show you guys here in a second. They're usually a little bit smaller than the actual base, so they're not sliding off the edge. Sometimes your vitrine bases will have a lip that you can fit that top into, which is really cool. It allows for you to stabilize it. For the most part, if you go online, you can find museum quality things. Specialty, I should have pulled this for you guys earlier. There is a couple companies that make smaller hanging cases that are pretty good, but you can go to Michael's and get the same thing. It's not a big deal. It's just we want to make sure that if you are buying this, it is the right size for the artifact or object or even the paperwork that you're wanting to hang in there, and that it has good hanging materials on the back. Because if you hang it and it falls, that's bad, especially if it's fragile. So as you can see behind me, again, this is a little backwards for me, but you guys are seeing it the way it should be. So we have 2 rooms down here, and we decided to split this story, A Walk in the Park, between Warren Dunes in room 1 and in room 2 is our parks. So one of the things we try to do when we're creating these exhibits is to think about how you, the audience, are interacting with it. So we try to create a narrative that makes sense. Sometimes that's a linear timeline, sometimes that's a story timeline, sometimes it's just smaller narrative into a much larger one. So we do have a bit of a breakaway. The guy behind me right here, this has nothing to do with Warren Dunes. These are other parks. I had this very beautiful picture from Grove Park that we used in the last exhibit that I wanted to bring back. Actually, for my temporary exhibits, I seem to be recycling a couple things. Our Tabor Hill wine from like the 50s or whatever it is, that was in 3 exhibits, which was probably 3 exhibits too long for it to be out, but it was too cool not to keep out. We've been using fake fruits and vegetables in the last 4 exhibits, so we'll have one. They're not out here yet. I haven't had a chance to pull them, but we'll have them in here. So I'm going to take you guys on a little bit of a tour. I know you will miss my pretty face, but so one of the first things that we do is we like to give it a theme. So in this case, we decided to do parks. Our choice to do the park system is because in 2014, we became part of the Parks Department for Berrien County. And never at any point in time did we actually celebrate that. And we should have last year because it was our 5th year anniversary as part of the park system. Being part of the park system means that we have access to park and recreation related grants for things. And I would like to look more into that. We also have a guaranteed stable connection. I can go to Brian Bailey or whoever will replace Brian after he retires to say, hey, I need this. Can you help me? I have access to the maintenance crew, mostly during the winter, not necessarily during the summer because they're so busy with the other parks. But for the most part, what we have done is, so the first thing we do is I like having vinyl. And this tells you, this is our introduction, this tells you exactly what's going on in here. Let's hope I don't fall. So I went to Warren Dunes, and thank you so much to Warren Dunes for being a part of this. This is really cool. So I had gotten a lot of photos, and I took pictures of some maps out there, and I got from like the 70s, I had a scrapbook from like the 70s that featured all these different articles. And so because of the age of some of these photos, I decided to create an office space. So in this case, I chose to use a vignette. Vignette, love it. And so I pulled out a table from our, from over in Records Building, and I just added things to it. So this really old computer, that's part of our collections, guys. If you had a computer like this, you are officially in a museum. You may be too old. We were able to get some old brochures. So one of the things I like to try and include in these are some sort of interactive for people, because we want families and we want people to feel like they're having fun. So we created this office space, and then we got Brock. I've named him Brock. He looks like a Brock. He is our mannequin from next door. He's a little hard to see because he's terribly backlit. But the DNR had some uniforms that we were able to get. Now, all we got from them was the shirt, the pants, his hat, and then we have a coat. By the way, this is a woman's size because he's so small. They gave us the woman's size. And I was like, well, we have a problem because poor Brock here is a little longer in the leg than whoever wore this. So we had to get him boots. Thankfully, we had boots in our collection that we were actually able to get him into to do it. So in this case, we had to do a combination of our stuff and their stuff to tell the story. And that's how it should be. We should be combining different elements to tell the story. Sometimes we try to do visual things. So behind me, this will be very difficult, but when we reopen, you guys can come see it. How cool is this? This is actually a plot map that tells us exactly what land had been owned by who before it was either sold, donated, or otherwise given to the state to create Warren Dunes State Park. The cool thing is they had these pictures of the Ramoth. I think that's how it's pronounced. So if you're local and I pronounced it incorrectly, please correct me. The farm, and we know exactly where on the plot map it was. So we were actually able to take these pictures from 1917 and connect it to the map. So we just did it an old-fashioned way. We used yarn and tape and push pins for this. So this guy was printed out. We use Artifacts and Bridgman for our vinyl. And when I need to have larger pieces of foam core made up that I can't make in-house, they make it for us. It's always so much easier. I am much too rough to do this. So what we did is we decided to continue the story. So here we have, you guys will not be able to read it, and that's fine. We went ahead and wrote 2 interpretive panels. And this tells the story of the 3 state parks in the area. So you got Warren Dunes, Grandmere, and Warren Woods. But we have the pictures of the Warrens because we wanted to connect it to them. Sometimes we only have a limited amount of things for a particular subject, so we have to find some way to fill it in. So for example, we had 2 maps, these 2 maps for the church camp that was inside Warren Dunes. But I can't just put that up there, so we had to write interpretive panel, so it was a very short story, so we were able to do it. And then I needed something to kind of offset it, so we were able to find a picture in our own collections to use. And then we have a very large collection of Bibles. I very much likely next year could have a whole month of an exhibit just showcasing the Bibles. And we're not talking like, it's not like the polyglot Bible I showed you guys last week. We're talking these behemoths. These are things that will break your toes if you drop them on you. So you decided to bring out one of the Bibles just to be able to showcase it. One of the cool things is, for example, like when we did Wish You Were Here, and then the and then we did like the Christmas exhibit, is we don't have to have interpretation for those. We're just showcasing things from our collections. And we don't necessarily have to have a story that has to be told. We just get to bring things down. The cool thing about the Christmas exhibit was that we challenged ourselves. What are kind of things that people would have received as Christmas presents? And so we were able to do it that way. And people kept asking, what's the story being told? It's Christmas morning. That's the story being told. Here, we're in the second room. And this is mostly park stuff. And so if you're not aware, there are 6 or 7 parks under the county park system, including us. We are technically a county park. That means our grounds are technically open from dawn till dusk, but our grounds are not very welcoming. So people don't really wander the grounds like they should. So when they came to me, when I went to them, they gave me a handful of things. Well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? So then it became a challenge for me to say, well, how do I take these things and tell a story with it? So I was able to get some slides. I feel really bad for everyone because I still got their stuff. I had gotten these slides, and a couple of the slides that they had featured, this is hard to tell. Again, we want you to come see it, so we can't give everything away. This is maple sugaring. And I remember asking Lamanda, when did you guys do maple sugaring? She goes, we haven't done it in years. But they still have their maple sugaring stuff. And so it became a challenge. How do I showcase the maple sugaring stuff, especially if I have a limited amount of vitrines and I prefer it to cover things that are fragile? Well, I'd gone into records building and I found this huge piece of wood. It's kind of hard to tell. And we actually use this in the cross saw demonstrations for Pioneer Day. Well, we're not doing Pioneer Day this year, so I absconded it and brought it in here. And I was actually able to nail in using nails this is a very hard wood. I can't get in anything. I can't get the spouts in here very deep. So what I did is I used nails to put them in there and provide the weight I needed to hang that off of it. And of course, we got our maple sugar and stuff up there. So I was actually able to create this little thing that people can pass by and see. Now, if you've gone to maple sugaring, this is going to be something that you're going to remember. So the other thing we had is that Love Creek used to be the site of the infirmary and the general hospital and the poor farm. And Lamanda has done a ton of excavating out there as she's worked the park. And she found tons of old bottles and IVs in there. And then we have all these smaller bottles in here. So she gave me a bunch of them. So again, we got a little creative. And this vignette over here tells us the story of the poor farm. Now, my goal is at some point to have a full story about the poor farm with Lamanda, and a couple of others showed interest in telling the story of the poor farm. So this is pretty cool. We have this little tidbit. But one of the things I decided to do is, because we're talking about these natural parks, one of the pictures that we received was this. It's very hard to see, but it's a picture of Love Creek from like the 80s. From the 80s of upcoming programs. And so one of the things Love Creek does is education about the natural world around us. And we have this guy behind me. It's hard to tell, but that is a taxidermy display of birds native to the area. It was owned by a man here at Orinoco Township, and it was made in 1880. It's not the best of taxidermy, but it works. So we decided I had reached out to some friends of mine who are bird lovers and had them ID the birds for me, because I wasn't 100% certain if our information was correct. They identified all the birds for us, so thank you to them for that. And we decided to create an interactive with this. 1, it put this piece out on display. 2, it connected history to the natural information that you'd find at Love Creek and those kind of programs. And 3, it gave us an interactive. So we have a match game. By the way, if you're watching this and you're getting seasick, I do apologize. So I created these little match cards. So all the birds, you can come and play a match game and challenge yourselves to see if you can ID the birds, and then match not just the cards to their pairs, but the cards to the bird. We also decided to do something a little bit more geographical, and we have this guy. So once I'm able to get back into some more general stores, I gotta find little markers that people can place out and ID where all of the parks and things we talk about. We did include Chickaming and open lands, and we did include Fernwood in there because they are technically part of that story. And I made that before this all went down, so I decided to keep it as such. So when we do the exhibits, we're trying to make sure a couple of things. Number 1, everything is at a level that we can see. So I'm 5'6", and so I'm about an inch taller than the national average for women. So the first thing we do is we look at the level, make sure it's at a level where it doesn't look awkward in the space that we're in, nor is it too low or too high for people to enjoy. Number two, we make sure if we do have interpretation, it is at a level that people can actually understand. Our goal is to reach the most amount of people as possible. So it's important that when we're using language that is accessible to as many people as possible. So seventh grade is usually the level that we write at especially in this capacity. Number three, we make sure we have the artifacts and the images to tell the story. Sometimes the only story I can tell is through images. Other times the only story I can tell is through artifacts. But for the most part, we try to work it out so that the narrative we're telling can include multiple aspects. The third thing that I try to take into consideration, and most museums are trying to take into consideration these days, is what level of interaction that we can provide for you. So when you come through, you can interact with that exhibit and share your own memories. We've had people ask them to share their memories or their favorite Christmas memories. We've had people maybe write their own postcards for us. So we try to find something. The match game was something that just happened to come out of the blue for me, and we may possibly make that available digitally if people are showing interest in it. So when you're at home, you're going to want to do a couple things. Number one, make sure that you are framing things correctly. If you can find something that kind of helps out with the UV for your older stuff, that would be great. If you're looking to hang artifacts, like a vitrine or whatever, a little case, make sure it's got a good quality hanging system in the back. You are able to purchase hanging systems and tracks like that for your own home, and they're great for art. So if you're someone who loves art, has a ton of art, that's what you'll want to go for because you can hang bigger pieces on it at the level that you want. When you're hanging it, make sure that you are pairing things comfortably. You want it to balance out. You don't want it hodgepodgey where it just does make no sense. So pair like images together, pair frames, maybe get the same type of frame style, or maybe you want to get maybe the same color frame but in different styles if you want to be a little bit more eclectic. Mix things up. Some of it could be art, some of it could be framed photos, it could be a couple of different things. So anyway, that's what we do here because we need to. We have a hodgepodge of things. We have a huge collection of empty frames, so we like to use those guys to help offset the the very almost plain looking foam core images that we put together here. And it creates a pretty dynamic look to it. So this vignette here would look a lot different if we didn't have that bigger frame anchoring it. So you always want to look for things that kind of anchor so it doesn't look like just random things put together. Play with it and listen to what you have. Make sure that when you're doing these things that you're listening to what you have. That's what I do. I try to make sure I'm listening to the artifacts. Sometimes I pull an artifact and it doesn't work. Other times I pull an artifact and it's the perfect thing. So I listen to what's going on and I trust my gut. And that's really all you can do. So that's it for this week. You guys got a good chance to take in a walk in the park. A walk in the park. And next week we're going to talk about fundraising and more importantly, talking about where your money goes to make things like this a reality. So don't forget to join us next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. And we are thankful that you're coming with us every week. And we'll see if there's enough interest, we'll continue this series even into May. So you guys have a great Thursday and a great rest of your weekend. Bye, guys.